Blizzard has been developing the game World of Warcraft for many years, and in its many years of development, Blizzard has played some practical jokes on players. Every time April Fools comes around, Blizzard comes up with some new way to troll players that are unaware of the date. In this video, I will be going over 5 times Blizzard trolled the World of Warcraft player base. Number 1 is Blizzard announcing the Molten Core console game. As most of you guys know, Molten Core has been a raid that was the first ever raid put into World of Warcraft, and Molten Core really was the most primitive version of a raid we know of today. Molten Core as a raid was extremely primitive and basic. In fact, many of the models were just larger versions of rock elementals and fire elementals, and they just called that a new boss. Using already existing models and just increasing the size of them would never happen today, but back in the early days of WoW, this was something very common, and Molten Core really was the prototype for modern World of Warcraft raiding. Blizzard announced on April Fools that they will be creating a Molten Core console game, and this console game was basically making fun of how primitive Molten Core was. They boasted having 10 bosses with 6 unique models, which may be more than the unique models used in the real Molten Core in Vanilla WoW, and boasting things such as having sound, being able to move in 8 unique directions, and so on. The funniest thing is how they would announce a trailer for the classic WoW Molten Core when it comes out. There really isn't much to boast about when it comes to this raid. It is basically a big cave where you fight bigger versions of elementals you have been farming since day 1. Number 2 is Blizzard announcing Wisps as a playable race in the Burning Crusade. Have you ever wanted to play as a Wisp? Chances are you probably have never even thought of it. But in this April Fool's prank, Blizzard announced that they would be announcing Wisps as a playable race, and it is pretty hilarious how they advertised this as a real thing. The tagline, "In the end, only one power was strong enough to defeat the insidious Archimond, the Wisps." And that is true, however, you don't want to play as one. They're so lame. They're like a floating night elf head. I don't think anyone asked to play as a Wisp. I think the funniest thing is the character customization screen where you give a Wisp a mustache. What is the point of a Wisp having a mustache? There is literally no point. Number 3 is the WoW dance competition. However, this is not that far-fetched considering the things that have been released in modern WoW. The WoW dance competition would honestly pretty much fit in today's modern WoW. In this dance competition update, you can challenge other players and have a dance off. It is basically like a mini game. To be honest, this is not much more absurd than having pets battles and things of that nature, like the selfie cam. This would fit right in with those updates, to be honest. But Blizzard at the time thought this was a joke and that it would never be put into the game. Number 4 is Murloc as a playable race. Now, Murloc as a playable race would honestly be pretty awesome. Like, you can imagine how much fun it would be playing in a Murloc starting zone and controlling a Murloc as you play through WoW. And it is pretty impossible considering that Murloc have no way to communicate with other intelligent life forms. Their language is basically as primitive as it gets. It is basically just gurgling and murgling, and there's no way you communicate in Orcish or Common. It's pretty far-fetched to imagine that Murloc being a playable race could be a thing. But damn, it would be so cool to play as a Murloc. Like, I would reroll a Murloc instantly. It's pretty fun to imagine what kind of spells a Murloc would have as their racials. Like, you could have like things like throwing down a net on a player. You could have like additional swim speed, things of that nature. Like, it would be so much fun to play as a Murloc in WoW, but there is no way it can happen due to it not being compatible with the lore or continuity of WoW. Number 5 is honestly kind of a letdown that this wasn't a real thing, but this is Blizzard announcing the Bard class. Now, the Bard class is something they basically gave teaser pictures to, and the way it looks like is that this is going to be a new class that they would introduce into the game, and it is basically something that plays on a theme of Guitar Hero or Dance Dance Revolution, where you have to like tap buttons at a certain timing in order to cast a spell with greater efficiency. That would be a pretty awesome idea for a class, in all honesty. Like, I can imagine this actually being a real class introduced in World of Warcraft in the future, and it's kind of a letdown that this was an April Fool's joke from Blizzard. Like, if this was an actual thing, I would actually be pretty happy about it. A Bard class is something that WoW has been missing quite a lot, considering how many other MMOs have Bard as a playable character. Unfortunately, Blizzard decided not to put the Bard class in, but we can always hope in the future. Well guys, if you enjoyed these videos, make sure to drop a like down below and subscribe to the channel for more. This is vaulty, signing out.